So let me introduce maybe myself first. I don't know, for those who don't know me. So I'm Dr. Renou-Wilson from UCD, lecturer and researcher, peatland scientist, and together with Dr. Kate Flood and Dr. David Wilson on the Zoom at the moment, we have been working on the Peat Hub Ireland project for the last year, and we're going to give you a wee presentation to start to give you food for thought. And we're going to have the open chat. So those on Zoom who can hear me, hopefully, please open your chat window so you can also contribute on the chat. And David and our assistant Elena as well here will be helping us with that. We have our techie Liz on sand. We borrowed from the Earth Institute in UCD. So hi, John. We can. So we all set now. I have one more person to introduce. So Kate. So the workshop is Kate's little baby. I think she's been working really hard to have this workshop special, and she had this great idea to invite for this workshop Dr. Matt Finch, who is going to join us for the day. And the reason is because gratefully accepted our invitation and came to us pro bono. So we're very, very happy. Matt is a facilitator. He's a strategy and foresight practitioner. He works with communities, companies, and institutions around the world to help them do useful and surprising new things. So that's the intriguing part. But more officially, he's an associate fellow of Oxford University Said Business School, where he teaches on the MBA executive he serves as a lead facilitator on the award-winning Oxford scenario programs, and that's why we got him on board. Scenarios. So you're going to have this peatland scenario today. So that's for the introduction. So I think we're okay for sound on Zoom, just to see. Liz, good. Okay. So today, so the first part, the project overview, and then we're going to have a few slides about our results. We're going to have a coffee break. During the coffee break, we're going to actually play, thanks to Tina Claffey, her lovely photographs. If you don't know her work, we're going to have that on display. We're going to come back, and then Matt is going to take over. This afternoon, we're going to have Eugene, thankfully, thanks to Eugene Dunbar to show us around Clone Pro Bog, as well as Elena, who's obviously doing her PhD on greenhouse gas emissions there, and she'll tell you all about it. Then we'll come back, because I think we need all to take a break, because our neurons are going to fire quite a lot with these future scenarios. So the walk will be a good thing, I think, for us. We'll come back here to discuss then what we can do. Yeah, that's that. So let's start the presentation then. What I wanted to, since we're going to talk about future scenarios, I wanted to start with the past. So I happened to come across my master's thesis recently, and the reason it caught my eye because the title was "What Future for Peatlands in Europe?" A really pure fluke. I really didn't. That was 27 years ago. Yeah, and I kind of my supervisor John Feehan, who can't be here today, he's the one who introduced me to peatlands. I hadn't seen a peatland at all until I arrived in Ireland in '96. So when I published when I did this thesis, it was my first piece of publication, actually. I published it in the Cahier de Géographie Physique in France because I wanted them to know about Irish peatlands, because it was what future for peatlands in Europe, case studies from Ireland, France, and the Baltic state. And the year was 97. And I thought that was interesting because 97 was actually the year the Habitats Directive came into law in Ireland. I think it was a year to be hopeful, and I can feel it in my thesis when I reread it. There was a lot of things we hadn't done, and then when I cross-check and said, well, now we've done all this, you know, so a lot of barriers have come down. We still have the same core issues, though, 27 years on. And this is even with the fact that back in 97, we weren't really that worried yet about global warming. We weren't worried about species extinction. We had a biodiversity crisis. We knew that, but it wasn't really, you know, dramatic. We didn't really discuss water challenged world, 52 degrees Celsius in New Delhi. That wasn't really on the menu. And of all things, I recall the word sustainability was something you entered in the Yahoo search engine and nothing came back. Really. It wasn't a word. In fact, I can't see the word sustainability in any of those early work. So what I suppose what I want to start with is today we're going to go into the future, come back, but we have to remember we came from somewhere and we can't change that. That's the idea of the back to the future. Okay, things have happened. Okay, we can't undo that. We just need to have to deal with those. What we can do though is nowadays we have the facilities and a lot of knowledge to think what will happen in 2050, what we want to happen in 2050, and then maybe come back and act now for that to happen. Out of interest, my last on my thesis, I had an interesting last recommendation, which was to establish a peatland consultation center. That's a terrible name for, but it's actually what I think we hoping the Peat Hub Ireland is going to build. It's only a scaffold, the Peat Hub Ireland project. We only build the scaffold for something that hopefully would be exactly that, a place of exchange of information, of expertise, but of experience as well, not just the experience from the people. And then the knowledge we know that we have peer-reviewed knowledge that we should be accessible. So I better late than never, right? So that's 27 years on, but we have I just want to do every reboot of a movie as an Easter egg. You know what an Easter egg is? You know, it's when you talk about a movie, an older version of the movie into the it's a clin d'oeil, whatever you call it. So Back to the Future actually was the title of my supervisor of the thesis, John Feehan. He had a wee paper published in a conference in 2000, and he sent me few copies of that paper, and it's on the in the gallery over there. So if those who are interested, but I thought it was nice. I didn't know about this paper until I looked at Back to the Future in my library, and I went, oh. So basically, what I think it's good is that it's bookends. John wrote that in 2000. So we're having we sort of have a peatland timeline between 2000 and now that we have reviewed this year. So yeah, it's a nice bookending bookends to set us on this conversation about peatlands. So okay.
You want me to move on to the slides? Or?
No. Unless I'm still on. Yeah. So today we really want to have a foresightful conversation about what we want to do with our peatlands, and it's at the core is this concept, sustainable peatland management. And I'm coming back to this idea of sustainability, which wasn't really well defined in the past. And I still think in 2024, we all will have a different definition. So why? Because different disciplines, and we know that from our survey we did of the researchers and stakeholders, they came up with different definitions, different sectors even have definitions, and at different timescales. I think that's the major problem. Over time, sustainability included loads of other concepts. For example, this regenerative principles, which is aiming for thriving ecosystems and society. And I think that's one we would like. I think this is something to aim for. So every time we're talking about sustainable peatland management, then it's not a thing, it's not a static thing, right? It's a movement. It's something that we have to keep doing to achieve this thriving ecosystem and societies. Why? Because now we are facing with so many other threats, climate change and lots of things, movements. So this is really a movement which involves then societal responsibilities to optimize the social, cultural, environmental, and economic contributions that peatlands make to the well-being of current and future generations. That's the kind of definitions we might want to, if you're happy with it, to start with. Here, actually, the word sustainability, I've been involved in building a sustainable path to Errigal in County Donegal there, which crossed boglands. And we use that word sustainable, you know, here it was really a case, even though we built a path through a degraded blanket bog that was protected, but it was for the people mostly that that's the important part of sustainability. And let's not forget that people are part of nature. So sustainable peatland management is not new. Some of you might remember the Bogland report. Back in 2011, we published for the first time a sort of comprehensive set of recommendations, 58 recommendations, which became the backbone of the Peatland National Strategy. But in it, and that's not often talked about, especially the protocol, I had put this slide, which was a vision for Irish peatlands in 2050. And so maybe we should look at this before we even contemplate scenarios. But back in 2011, and before the National Peatland Strategy came into place, this is what the research had given us in terms of what we should aim for in 2050. Good awareness of peatlands, active management, responsible treatment of all the land use types, integration, obviously climate impacts, favorable conservation status of all protected sites, and then a lot of actions. So that's just for you to have in the back of your mind that this is something that then became enshrined into the National Peatland Strategy, and along with other things that happen, including the Peatlands Community Engagement Scheme and other projects, we are now in 2024 ready to draft the new strategy. Now, I don't know what's happening with this new strategy, but I think this is now a good space to do this kind of workshop, because if we're building a strategy now, if we're going to obviously redraft the strategy for the next 10 years, I think we need to take stock of what we know, what worked, what doesn't work, but especially where we want to be at, rather than just react to short-term maybe impacts. So the vision statement in the National Peatland Strategy, if you remember, is to provide a long-term framework in which all of the peatlands in the state can be managed responsibly in order to optimize their social, environmental, and economic contribution to the well-being of these and future generations. So this is sustainable peatland development in there, okay? Okay, so this is the perfect time then to take stock. And that's why Peat Hub Ireland was, and I should have started with that, sorry. We are funded by the EPA, completely forgot to mention that. Now it's a good time. So the EPA funded a one-year project called Peat Hub Ireland. So it's only 1 year. So we had to sort of come up with an approach to collate evidence to encourage research, civic societies and policymakers to move towards an unbiased evidence-based position on how to manage sustainably Irish peatlands. And to collate evidence was, we put our brains together and we thought this is not just a simple literature review, okay? We just didn't want to have just looking at a literature review. We came up with a methodology because what was mostly important to us was this multidisciplinary knowledge. So that's why, so I'm more on the ecology side, forestry, agriculture. David Wilson is on the more like the climate side, and then Kate would be more on the social and community side. So we had a good team to look at that, but we still needed to make sure we gathered, we had a complete list of disciplines, expert, specialist expertise, and stakeholder experience. And then connect all this knowledge to support decision-making policy. So we don't have time today, and really this is not, the project is about to finish, but really this workshop is the sort of final piece of the jigsaw of this project, because what I really hope is this wheel of that we have there in this project is going to keep on being done regularly. We're going to, hopefully this will be there for everybody to keep doing every 5 years, maybe every 10 years. And the first maybe results, or not the results, but what we started with was identifying peatland knowledge into different research themes, so that we could start identifying then the stakeholders and the various, it's just to help categorize knowledge. So there's 8 research themes here, and in the middle here you have peatland land use categories as we know it, and a lot of people are always surprised that the largest category of land use is actually forestry, followed by grassland, then natural, very close, then cutover, and then cutaway. And all these themes then are there to help us through the methodology, which we're going to explain in a minute, really focus recommendations, because and that's the thing about peatlands, it's really at the crossroads of so many departments. So we need to really identify then who are the actors behind all this, okay? In the labyrinth that is on environmental legislation and making policy, there's always this problem of having clear definitions. We had this issue back with bogland, I remember. And so that's what we did. The first thing with this project is come up with peatland terms. Either they were suggested by the stakeholder survey or researcher surveys, or we ourselves put it together, and we have it now on our website. It's a live document, so people can actually submit through a form their own term for their own discipline, maybe. We have also shared this glossary on various platforms, including Peat Sense. I see Corrado is there. So it's really for everybody, and it should be disseminated, as widely as possible. And we have that also on our social media. So why is this important? I remember being at the Oireachtas committee hearing and having this discussion about cutaway bog, and then this gentleman kept saying, but that's not possible. And I was like, what do you mean? It's because in parts of Galway, a cutaway is actually what we call a cutover. And this is the problem we have. If we're not talking about the same thing in the first place, we're not going to have proper policy. So I'm not saying this is the definite ultimate. It's just that at least we can use that glossary to communicate, to know, okay, well, people who we're referring to the definition in this glossary. Okay. So So that's the beginning. Now I'm going to pass pass the baton to Kate, who's going to tell us more about the methodologies. And if you have any questions, but I think we'll leave the questions for after.
Yeah, great. Oh yeah, this is for Zoom, so I don't need to hear myself. So I suppose the idea of evidence synthesis, and it's part of a kind of a European and in research to inform policy and, you know, stakeholders. And we have this very complex peatland policy landscape in Ireland, and it crosses a lot of different sectors and areas. And this idea of policy coherence is increasingly something that we need to kind of deal with, because you have things like CAP that maybe are going against or before the new CAP, maybe, you know, peatland, sustainable peatland management. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about evidence, you know, what counts as evidence, and this process of designing policy. You know, you have this policy cycle, and as you move through this policy cycle, traditionally in research, there was this idea of evidence as, you know, quite a linear model of, you know, knowledge moving from evidence to policy to action. Now, I think we recognize that evidence is just one part of an overall kind of picture when it comes to how policy is designed and the different stages of policy design, from agenda setting and formulation and decision making to implementation. And I suppose the implementation is the key thing, because you know, some people would say that policy is actually what happens on the ground, not what's in the formal documents. But so, you know, throughout this process, you have things like lobbying, different people's values and interests and that are competing, you know, path dependency, where there might be historical ways of doing things in agencies or institutions that are, you know, quite difficult to change. Evidence is in the mix as well. You have the political culture of the time, which is increasingly, you know, relevant in Europe and Ireland. The media is a big one as well, how peatlands are represented. You know, there isn't much research on that aspect of things. The social and economic system, and of course public opinion as well as the budgets and, you know, all of that kind of stuff. So you have all this going into the mix. And I suppose the idea of evidence synthesis, and I suppose one of the parts of our outputs of evidence synthesis would be systematic review, which is something, you know, you might be familiar with. But it's any kind of bringing together of knowledge and evidence. And this year, you know, I suppose this linear model is how it traditionally would have been done, but really it's circular, and increasingly it's that need to bring in stakeholders and, you know, listen to whatever you like to call them, actors, stakeholders, people, and to bring those into the policy process. And you know, that's kind of on the policy side. Then, you know, on the research side, we see the same kind of trends towards, you know, more collaborative and inclusive research. And, you know, you'll be familiar with impact in terms of research, and there's often a focus on academic impact. You know, research is obviously, the contribution to knowledge is important. But increasingly they're looking at different types of impact, societal and economic impact. And, you know, I suppose the engaged research is a suite of approaches that are participatory and collaborative, and aim to bring in communities. And by communities, I think not just local communities, but policy-making communities, NGOs, civil society. And at the moment, there is a national working group in engaged research across Irish universities, working to come up with a kind of a definition of impact. Each university has their own definition, but essentially it's benefit to society or benefits from the research. And with the new Research Ireland body as well, that's bringing Science Foundation Ireland and the IRC together. So I suppose the research landscape is changing, and this is what national and EU funders are looking for, you know, this more participatory kind of collaborative approach. So I'm just going to talk about the methodology now and how we tried to achieve that. Excuse me, bit of a frog. So traditionally, when you know, you do an evidence synthesis like that, it's just looking at the peer-reviewed literature. Sometimes grey literature, but generally a systematic review will follow a very specific protocol. And we use that protocol, but we also wanted to bring in grey literature and also expert knowledge and stakeholder knowledge. So we did the we searched for the peer-reviewed literature in two databases, Web of Science and Scopus, and that is the kind of literature that has been assessed. And we also got submissions from the researcher survey, which I'll look at as well. And then the grey literature and the theses, that unpublished theses, is to kind of reduce publication bias, because often what gets published, you know, there's more to knowledge, I suppose. It's bringing in and integrating these different forms of knowledge. And then the expert or practitioner knowledge in terms of the surveys. So we did a researcher survey with around 40 researchers, and it was sent to 100, and a stakeholder survey with about 100 responses. So this is the kind of protocol. You might be familiar with this kind of lovely flow chart with all the numbers in it. And so this was the search string that we used. How many words for bog can you find? And we did some testing around including words like biodiversity, you know, and management and all of that. But we got enough results to make sure, you know, we tested to make sure it was including everything. So the total on the database side is there, and the total from other sources. So we looked at Google Scholar as well, and we did site searches of the EPA website, NPWS website, Geological Survey as well, and then removed the duplicates. And then we screened out studies based on whether it was, so we're focusing only on Irish research, whether it was relevant to peatlands or sustainable peatland management. And then the other databases were, we have a history and literature database, which we separated out, and a Turlock's one as well. So the final number was 946 records in the database. I might just say this. Yeah, okay. Yeah. So they're the other two databases which will be available as well. And then that's the database in numbers. So that was our final number of records. And the peer-reviewed journal articles, 520, Google Scholar records, EPA research reports, theses. And then we had suggestions from researchers as well. And then at the end of this, we're going through, and just to make sure that if anything is missing, we'll manually add it. So this just shows the publications by year. So it's a kind of a steady increase over time. And then in 2023, we finished in, the search was in October, so it wouldn't be showing all the publications for 2023. And I suppose the thing to say about this method is it's replicable. It can be updated, as Flo was saying, it's that circle, we can come back to it. So this just gives a nice visual of the breakdown of the themes that we used in the end. And I suppose the biodiversity and management, paleo environment and climate are in the top 4. And then, you know, as you go down, I suppose you see areas where more research is needed. So just moving on to the survey then, and how we incorporated some of the, and some of you I'm sure filled it in, and thank you for that. The researcher survey, we were asking about, you know, facts or what is known in your discipline, the main issues, knowledge gaps, suggestions for the glossary, and submissions, which we've incorporated already. And what does sustainable peatland management mean in your discipline? The stakeholder survey, then we just wanted to get an idea of peatland projects and the main issues in your sector or area of interest, and knowledge gaps and suggestions for the glossary. So these will be just a little word cloud, and you know, there was different kind of suggestions that we will look at as well. They're not in the glossary at the moment, but we will look at that. So then we looked at barriers and enablers for research as well. So this is just a breakdown, I suppose, of the disciplines, and you know, it kind of reflects the knowledge gaps, in a sense that, you know, we have a good, you know, there's always more to be learned. We have a good representation in the natural sciences, but that need to bring in the social sciences and understand the social and human dimensions of peatland conservation is a gap, and the others then arts and humanities and ag science, and the breakdown as well. So this is just to illustrate, you know, what Flo was saying about how different people describe sustainability. And, you know, for my discipline, it's GHG emissions. Some people look at that suite of ecosystem services and, you know, that integrated, bringing in the social and the cultural and ecological, and hydrology, you know, participation, tourism management, and, you know, societal behaviour change and social change. So then the stakeholder survey, we had a good representation from landowners, farmers, community, and then others as well. So that's just to show who was represented. In terms of the main barriers, I think it kind of links back to the, you know, that kind of collaborative participatory element. That we asked people to rank these. So the lack of collaboration, limited engagement of stakeholders were seen as barriers to using and applying research, and long-term funding and financing of the research. So also then the influence of public perception, vested interests and lobby groups. As we saw with the first slide on policy, you know, that can have as much influence on policy as evidence. And then the translating research findings into recommendations and communicating the research. So these are some quotes from the stakeholder survey. You know, silos are a problem. Building trust and understanding, so this lack of collaboration, poor engagement with landowners, knowledge of practical management, limited long-term studies, so the financial barriers. So they kind of link up, you know, and then some new things as well, like access to information is a big one. You know, data is there, but sharing that between institutions. So again, it's that idea of, you know, how do we create these, I suppose, spaces for collaboration and communication, and then power dynamics as well. Had to mention that. So which these are some of the enablers. You know, it's kind of the opposite side, looking at the solutions instead of the problems, enhancing stakeholder engagement, more effective communication of research. And I think that's one thing we're trying to do with fact sheets, which we'll come to later. Building shared understanding of research, and increasing funding mechanisms for collaboration, and the idea of credibility and acceptance of the research. We saw recently with, you know, in terms of the media, you know, how things like rewetting and the nature restoration law are represented. Thanks, Flo.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Thank you. Have a wee glass of water.
Oh, yeah, I know.
Okay, so evidence synthesis is all about communicating knowledge, but then it has to be in an available format that people need. So what we started with is this huge database. So the nearly 1,000 pieces of work, which will be released, will be uploaded. Everybody will be able to have access to that database. As you can see, you know, an ID number, author theme, it's got everything you need to do. So if you're even a young researcher starting working on peatlands, that would be obviously your first place to go. If you don't know something about, I don't know, a term you heard like paludiculture, maybe you've heard, and you don't know what, you want to find research about that, it will be in there. So from that database, we split the themes amongst ourselves to basically read through all those. What we did then is we extracted key informations, key messages, or anything that on top of the key messages, maybe the knowledge gaps that paper had identified, and we integrated this in a review matrix. And from that review matrix, then we made briefing notes. The briefing notes then have sub-themes. So for example, under biodiversity, we have amphibians and invertebrates, where the ID number has a particular message for that. What's the message? What's the key message for that from that paper or report? That wasn't obviously sufficient because we had too many. We crunched all this information to combine into key messages, and then those messages then would have a number, which is the ID number from the database. So each of those messages then come up with the reference, and that is a long form fact sheets that we called it, which will be available. Which will be then combined into, we call it the media fact sheet. Media fact sheets will be, so basically here, a typical long form fact sheets might have about 40 messages. We're going to extract the key ones that are useful for people, especially, have that communicated then on various platforms. These particular fact sheets will be reviewed by the experts of that particular theme. So the ones, for example, on archaeology will be sent to archaeological experts just to make sure we have everything correct. But again, these fact sheets will be very live document. They cannot be updated very quickly, so that we add every time there's a new message or something important for people to know, it can be put in there, because these are just templates. We just add a piece of information and then replace that. So we have so far, so we have 12 fact sheets, but under certain fact sheets, we decided to have more. So for example, one should have the forestry, agriculture, wind farms, peat extraction, and maybe fire as well. But at the moment, we have come up with 3 templates, and today, part of today was also to get your ideas as to what you prefer, what you don't like, what you like. We have those 3 printed around the room here, so you can see them in live. But for those who are on Zoom, you can have a look at them as well and see what you like. We'll ask you at the end. There's also we'll do a little poll. So what we're going to do for the next 5 minutes is I will present the first, maybe the key messages that came from biodiversity. David will present the climate, and Kate will present the society. So for each of those themes, then we have some facts. Now, facts, there could be lots more facts, so we can't be really, we can't have everything. But what I found is, things that are really important for people to understand. So facts such as the fact that peatlands don't have that many species, but they're highly specialized. And why this is important is because they can't survive in another ecosystem. They can't compete with other species in grassland and forestry. I think that's important for people to understand. It's not that we have, I typically tell my students, if you come back from 2 bogs, one has three sheets full of species and one has only one, I know the one that is degraded, and it's not the one with the main, with the most species. Okay, so that's a typical that's a kind of a fact I think that is important to make for people to understand. We had a lot of studies to do with birds back in the 2000s, and that was probably associated with lots of big projects to do with afforestation of blanket bogs and the impact on birds. And there was a lot of interesting facts in there. But what happened is over the years, then we realized we really are now losing those birds. And so obviously peatlands are very important for birds that are maybe now are getting close to extinction. What was, again, another important fact is that all peatlands, and that a lot of studies showed that it doesn't matter what kind of peatlands status. So if it's cutover or natural, all of them in all regions, Midlands, West, Northwest, Southwest, they all are important. We really, at this point, we can't just ignore one, or take one over another. And I will come back to that in a minute. What I found then, what I wanted to add here is that while we are very maybe pushed towards studying maybe the habitats for a good reason, because without the heterogeneity of habitats, we don't have the species. Okay, that's important. However, we really have limited ourselves to what we see. We need to really now get down to what we don't see, the microbiota and the molecules, the genes, because we have things there that are really, really important. Why? Because it's the microbiota that is munching away the peat and decomposing it and releasing carbon. So all that we need a lot of more knowledge. And the molecule sides, there's this big project in Trinity at the moment about pharmacology. Obviously, there was a lot of papers from that, but that's only looking at a tiny, tiny amount of plants. You know, we have so many other things to look at. And again, it's a question of when will we realize what we have before we've lost it, kind of story. The trends, well, it's not new. I think we all know that, but it's very bad on all fronts, not only as a habitat at landscape level, but at species level, and even at now invertebrate level. So recommendations. Well, again, I had to pick a few to fit in that slide, but there's lots more out there that we're going to put on the fact sheets. What I would like to maybe focus on is now the challenge of managing peatlands that are not necessarily in pristine state. We need to look at those. We can't afford not to now look at those degraded peatland sites, and that's through maybe agri-environmental schemes that we need to look at the biodiversity, because that biodiversity, we're going to lose it if we don't look at the small peatlands, the degraded peatlands, and a few recent papers have really pointed out to the buffer zone, the area around this. This is really important. We kind of got ourselves just a boundary. Nature doesn't work with boundary. Okay, so we need to, and that was actually funny enough a recommendations from my master thesis, but it seems like we have lost track of this areas that are at the edges of the bogs, that are corridors, and they are merging with other systems. And if we are really concerned with biodiversity and not just species, but landscape and diversity of human experience as well, we need to really look at those areas. One thing that came clear is that local biodiversity action plans are really a perfect local scale opportunity to protect biodiversity and restore it. And the other side then, which reside with the planners, it's really makes any development really to put peatlands first, rather than just have developments fragmenting landscapes. So this is in a nutshell. Other things would obviously be obvious, but we don't have time today. So I will pass it on to David, who should be unmuting himself now. And I will.
Yeah. Good morning, folks. Lovely to be with you virtually this morning. So peatlands and greenhouse gases are actually a sub-theme of the larger air theme, but they're very well represented in their own right in our database, accounting for about 7% of the entries. And some of the key facts that came out of our review of the database is that Irish peatlands store around 2.2 billion tonnes of carbon. And what's very interesting in this value is that in the 23 years of that the database covers, that this value is almost doubled. So it's really reflecting how important science is to keep it moving and to never stand still and never be satisfied with what you find and constantly refine your outputs. So it's a significant amount, a substantial amount of carbon locked up. And this feeds into then everything else that we're concerned about in terms of greenhouse gases. And we know from the Irish studies that near-natural, and we have no natural sites, so near-natural sites are generally carbon sinks, but not always. In some years, when there's drought conditions, in the middle of the summer particularly, even near natural sites can become carbon sources. But in generally, they're carbon sinks, taking in a small amount of CO2, releasing a small amount of methane and dissolved organic carbon. But in contrast, and this is borne out by the work in Ireland and internationally as well, drained sites are always carbon sources. And they're always going to have a warming impact on the climate, in contrast to the near natural sites, which have been shown to have a generally cooling impact on the climate. And from moving on then in terms of land use management, we find that from our work in Ireland and also and internationally, that re-wetting is a climate-proof mitigation strategy for a number of reasons. Firstly, bringing the water level higher up in the peat profile, you essentially shut off the CO2 emissions. There is a release of methane, but that can be highly variable depending on the site. And crucially, then you set the site onto a re-wetting and climate mitigation pathway that at some point the site will start to bring in CO2 as the near natural and natural sites do, and over time will have a cooling impact on the climate. And this is borne out by numerous studies in our database and also internationally as well. And the final key fact for this talk and this workshop today, as Flo has alluded to, we have plenty others, is that afforestation, and I would also add re-afforestation of peatlands, is certainly a very unsuitable climate mitigation strategy, given the new knowledge that we have in terms of the CO2 emissions coming from the soil that have drastically changed the picture in terms of the carbon sink, carbon source function of afforested peatlands in Ireland. Thank you, Flo. Yeah, so in terms of recommendations, it's really a no-brainer given what I've already alluded to here, is that drained peatlands should be targeted for re-wetting. It's a win-win-win situation from climate point of view. But the key approach is that it has to be a site-by-site approach. We know from Irish studies and also from international studies that near-natural and natural sites don't tend to vary that much in terms of the CO2 and methane dynamics. In contrast, re-wetted sites are just a category of their own, in that they are highly erratic in terms of what each particular site might do in terms of its greenhouse gas dynamics. So that should be the focus. Each site requires a different approach in terms of re-wetting, and this encompasses not only the biogeochemical parts of it, but also the social parts as well, in terms of the landowners in the area around the particular site. We also recommend that there needs to be a repository geographical information database that documents where public and private peatland rewetting projects are, because as I think many of us are aware, it's a Wild West situation out there at the moment with rewetting projects popping up left, right and centre to avail of carbon credits and financing. And there's no regulation, and there is indeed no information at all as to where some of these may be actually happening. And in terms of inventory reporting, and I know a considerable amount of work has been done in recent years on this, but we need, high resolution maps of all Irish peatlands under a range of management and land uses, and they need to be developed in order to make the inventory workers' lives a little easier and to be more precise in our emissions reporting. And like many researchers, you can't get enough data, no matter how much you have. But the key thing that we're missing in a lot of Irish sites is multi-annual measurements of carbon balances. A lot of the funding seems to be geared for 1 and maybe possibly even 2-year studies. And the studies for 5 years and greater are extremely rare. And they're so very, very important in terms of trying to set the scene as to what happens in these sites with climate, with changes in weather, etc. So in terms of future research, again, it's more research is needed, but we are missing, and the database backs this up, we are missing a lot of knowledge, particularly the greenhouse gas dynamics in cutover peatlands. And given that cutover peatlands are now included in our national inventory reporting in a meaningful way prior to this year, they were not acknowledged because we just didn't have the aerial data of any description to incorporate them. But we still lag behind considerably in terms of our knowledge of greenhouse gas dynamics in this particular land use category. And again, as I alluded to earlier, remote sensing expertise is urgently needed to upscale these fluxes that we measure on often a very, very small scale, hectare scale, and we need to get that up to regional and national schools. And a common bugbear amongst researchers, and was borne out by our surveys and also by almost nearly every paper that we read, was that some data remains hidden. And I don't mean to say that this is a conspiracy or anything like that. It just seems to be that some of the data is recorded on paper records. In other cases, researchers are reluctant to share information because it might compromise their own papers and publications in terms of publications that are in the process of being published. But we really have to consider that the only way to move forward and to get better knowledge is that data should be much more freely available to all researchers that require it. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we need more studies, particularly in restored peatlands, and to identify the most effective restoration approaches, not just from climate, but also from biodiversity and the social needs of the communities around the peatlands. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, David. We move on to another fact sheet. Kate, do you want to take over? I can move this slide.
So I suppose when it comes to these social dimensions of restoration, conservation management, there is a large body of research, globally, European, that, including people is really important for management of ecosystems. And it sounds obvious, but we're not really doing it the way we should be. So when I looked at, we have, going back to 2000, there was 38 papers, which is about 4% of the total. when I looked at the kind of themes that were coming out, we divided it into participation, values, and culture. And, you know, it ties into kind of what I was saying earlier in terms of policy and in terms of research and practice. Participation, participatory management, collaboration, consultation, whatever you want to call it, including stakeholders. And, you know, underlying that is the different forms of knowledge that you're bringing together. So expert knowledge, peer-reviewed knowledge is really important, but we're in this era of post-normal science where facts are uncertain, values are in dispute, the stakes are high, and decisions are urgent. So we need to include a lot more in terms of different forms of knowledge. And, you know, the global assessments like the IPCC and the biodiversity and ecosystem services assessments talk about this, including Indigenous and local knowledge and the importance of that. So I suppose then, you know, that really brings, it is about equity and justice and power dynamics and how we balance all of that. And it brings in, there's some recent research about just transition as well, which is very interesting. It's interviewing board Nimona workers. And then the values kind of theme, and all of these do intersect and overlap, is around looking at the non-market values of peatlands. And going back to Flo and the team that did the Bogland report, they found, they interviewed communities around peatlands in the Midlands and found there was a really high value put on non-market values, or things like biodiversity, amenity, all of that. And there's also a body of literature looking at energy systems and, you know, climate as well from that perspective. And then culture, the last one, I suppose, is around the importance of things like the arts and heritage and place-based approaches in, you know, engaging people in climate and peatland issues. And, you know, the great work that is taking place here in Tyrrell's Pass with ethos and community groups like that all around the country. And it's also culture, I suppose. There's the obvious parts of culture like literature and the arts and heritage, but also the way of life of us as an Irish society and our beliefs and our values and how we do things or don't do things. So it includes that. And media as well is another. There are no studies on media. There are some on climate change, which mention bogs and peatlands. So I suppose the key messages are around encouraging participatory, community-based and action research, these suite of engaged research approaches that we mentioned earlier, to understand the sociocultural and human dimensions of management. And, you know, how do we do that in our organizations? You know, is there guidance? Is there expertise on these participatory approaches in policy and practice? Sorry, moving on to that. You know, these processes and structures, and to encourage stakeholder engagement, and institutional barriers to participation. So, you know, there is that kind of continuum from informing people and consulting them to actually collaborating and empowering. And we need to be moving more towards that empowerment, I suppose. And then that idea of including non-market values and public goods of peatlands. So the health and well-being benefits, and also, you know, increasing access is really important, but also looking at the impacts of that access and recreation and the commons as well. I'll leave that hanging just about the commons. So just to, I suppose, link it into our scenarios that are coming up. This is from the Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services Global Assessment, and they talk about the direct drivers and indirect drivers of biodiversity loss. And underlying that is our values and behaviours. And because it's like that iceberg model of culture or of, you know, society, where there's the things you can see and our values and behaviors are kind of invisible. They inform what we do.
It's really important that we start to look at that, because that's where this transformative change happens. And I suppose linking that to the scenarios that we're going to look at after the break with Matt, you know, they are around values and the different values we have. You know, it's not, and Matt will go into this, it's not about desired futures or good and bad things in each of them. But hopefully you got a chance to have a look at them, and we will look at them after the break as well. So yeah, thanks. Over to you.
So
Last slide. Where do we go from here? So we've only given you a flavor of the whole. I mean, there's a lot more there, but just to show you that you will be before the base, fact sheet, the media, and the long form fact sheets. This is a one-year project. As we set up the template, we hope it's going to be a living template. It's going to be continually turning this wheel. Okay, updating the glossary as we go. Sorry. Updating the glossary as people study or research or find new terms, you know, that comes in this space, and then keep updating this database with the published research. Obviously, it's becoming more and more easy now with the internet. So I haven't addressed the the big elephant in the room. We did a lot of work before 2000 as well. Some of us actually had most of our publication probably before 2000. This is to be accounted for. Now, in fairness, what we try to do is a lot of papers that came afterwards built on the previous knowledge, but there's a lot of things that were done. Unfortunately, some of them were only paper format, where in someone's office who's now retired, and all the papers have gone with that person. We need to, so we're going to have also some recommendations on what to do with that. Basically, that wasn't our remit, but what we want to find now is a location, so that we have actually also a physical location for at least some of those key reports. At some point, hopefully, maybe some TY student could digitize those, but I think it's important to understand that we have studies before 2000 that are key to understand Irish peatlands. So it's not like we are not taking them on board. We assume we know them from other from the more recent paper. Okay, where do we go? Again, I'm talking about a movement. So we have to, this sustainable peatland management is all about adaptive management, where we're fostering a culture of continued learning, experimenting, and monitoring to assess the effectiveness and adjust on the observed outcomes. If we don't observe, though, we can't do that. So, for example, this afternoon, you'll see Cloncrow, you'll see how the Care Peat project has done amazing work there to monitor everything that is happening since the rewetting by NPWS. And the problem is funding stops. Terry has to pull out the loggers because there's no money. That should not happen. That is one of our recommendations. If we learn anything, this is the one thing we should not do. So I want you to understand that we have Peat Hub Ireland is not just about adding things we should be doing. We should point out to what we should stop doing right now. That's, if anything, that's the one thing we should be doing now. Remove the things we don't want. We remove the policies that are, or anything that is really not helping. Because otherwise we can't do this. Okay, this is just part of the whole wheel there. We need to observe, we need to keep monitoring and keep reinforming. It's a long-term path to thriving peatlands and society. We're not doing it for ourselves, so we need to think, you know, to the future. So on that note, I'll just leave you with the last slide, which has the, I won't go to the next slide, which is the fact sheets. Never mind. It's the last slide, and it's to do with, if you can give us a wee vote for what those in the room can tell us more about your comments. Those on Zoom can also put in the chat what the comments as well as voting. There's actually paper format in the back room here. So